My name is Silas Thorne. I was a prison electrician at High Rock Maximum Security Penitentiary when the dead started walking. What began as an unusual electrical storm turned into the first night of a zombie apocalypse that nearly wiped out humanity. I survived because I discovered their weakness: electricity. This is how I kept breathing when everyone around me was dying or turning. Before we start the video, let us know what country you're tuning in from in the comment section below. Perhaps we will make a story there. Let's begin. I grew up fixing things. Ever since I was a kid in rural Montana, I had a knack for understanding how electrical systems worked. My mom used to say I could fix a toaster with paper clips and determination. That skill set eventually landed me at High Rock Maximum Security Penitentiary as their lead electrical systems manager. Not exactly the career path I dreamed about as a kid, but it paid the bills. For 10 years, I maintained every wire, circuit breaker, and generator in that concrete fortress. I knew the prison's electrical grid better than anyone alive. Every backup system, every fail-safe, every workaround when things went sideways. In a place holding 300 of Montana's most dangerous criminals, power failures weren't just inconvenient, they were potentially catastrophic. The inmates called me Switchblade because I was always carrying my electrical multi-tool. The guards trusted me because I kept their security systems running. I wasn't friends with anyone, but I was respected. That's how it worked inside those walls. Respect meant survival. 3 weeks before everything went to hell, I started noticing irregularities in our power readings. Nothing major, just unusual fluctuations, especially during storms. Equipment would malfunction, then fix itself. Lights would dim for no reason. I filed maintenance reports, replaced components, but the problems persisted. Like the prison itself was alive, its electrical nervous system misfiring in ways I couldn't diagnose. I should have recognized these anomalies as warning signs. But who connects power surges to the end of the world? Now I know better. Now I understand those were the first symptoms of what was coming. The weather had been strange too. Meteorologists on the local stations kept talking about unprecedented atmospheric disturbances moving across the northern states. Purple lightning that didn't behave like normal lightning. Static electricity strong enough to interfere with communications. The National Weather Service issued warnings about an approaching electrical storm system unlike anything they'd recorded before. I remember calling my sister Beth about it. She lived about 200 miles east with my nephew Tyler. We hadn't spoken much since our falling out 3 years ago, but weird weather seemed safe enough to break the ice. "The storm's headed your way after it passes us," I told her. "Maybe check your generator, just in case." "Since when do you worry about a little thunder, Silas?" She laughed. "Tyler's more scared of missing his video games than any storm." I wish I'd insisted harder. I wish I'd driven out there and prepared them myself. But how could I have known what was coming? The morning it all started was unusually hot for September in Montana. The air felt charged, heavy with something I couldn't name. The kind of stillness that comes before violence. Even the prison felt it. Inmates were agitated, pacing their cells. Guards were snapping at each other over nothing. The animals in the surrounding forests had gone quiet. I was doing my morning rounds, checking connections in the basement level where we housed the main generators. Garcia, the head of security, called me on the radio around 10 in the morning. "Thorne, you seeing these readings? Power's spiking all over the grid." I was watching the same thing on my monitors. Electricity usage surging without explanation, then dropping to almost nothing, then surging again, like the power was breathing. "I'm on it," I told him. "Might be related to that storm system moving in. I'll check the external connections." By noon, we'd gotten word that Ravens Ridge Memorial Hospital had lost power despite their backup generators kicking in. That was unusual. Their system was almost identical to ours, designed to withstand outages. I called my contact there, an electrician named Woodson, but couldn't get through. The first real warning came around 1 o'clock. The prison radio crackled with a transmission from the sheriff's department. Be advised, we have multiple reports of violent assaults at Ravens Ridge Memorial. Unknown number of individuals attacking hospital staff and patients. Situation developing. All available units respond. Garcia radioed me immediately. Thorne, you hearing this? Could be some kind of prison transport gone wrong, I suggested. Or psych patients. Remember that incident last year? No. This sounds different. They're saying people are biting each other, like animals. I laughed it off. Ravensridge was a small town. The most excitement we usually had was drunk hunters shooting at mailboxes. Whatever was happening at the hospital would be contained quickly. I was checking the prison's lightning protection system when the storm finally arrived. 1 minute the sky was clear. The next it was that sickly greenish-purple color that still haunts my dreams. The clouds didn't move like normal clouds. They spiraled, like water circling a drain. And the lightning. It wasn't flashing between clouds or hitting the ground randomly. It seemed to be striking specific locations, almost deliberately. The first bolt hit our communications tower at exactly 2:15 in the afternoon. I know the time because all our systems recorded the power surge before failing. The lights flickered once, twice, and then every electrical system in High Rock went dead. Standard procedure was to wait 30 seconds for the backup generators to kick in automatically. I stood in the basement, counting down. At 28 seconds, I heard the generators fire up. 2 seconds later, they went silent again. That was impossible. We had triple redundancies built into the system. There was no way all our backups could fail simultaneously unless someone had deliberately sabotaged them. Before I could investigate, the emergency alarms began blaring. Not the power failure alert I was expecting, but the prisoner riot alarm, the one we never wanted to hear. I tried raising Garcia on my radio, but all I got was static. With the main systems down, I had to get to the security control room manually. That meant crossing the central courtyard, the most exposed part of the prison. I was halfway across when I saw what was happening in cell block D. Through the reinforced windows, I could make out shapes moving erratically. Guards running, inmates out of their cells, bodies on the floor. What looked like fighting, but not normal prison fighting. This was something else, something feral. When I reached the control room, I found Garcia staring at the emergency monitors still running on battery power. His face was ashen. "It started in the infirmary," he said without looking at me. "Dr. Ramirez was treating Wilson. You know, that inmate brought in last week for aggravated assault? Wilson bit him. Actually bit a chunk out of his arm. Then Ramirez started convulsing. 3 minutes later, he was attacking the nurse. It's spreading, Thorne. Whatever this is, it's spreading through the whole prison." On the monitors, I could see inmates and guards alike moving with strange, jerky motions. Some were clearly attacking others. Some were feeding on bodies already on the floor. The infected moved differently, twitching, convulsing whenever they came near electrical equipment or metal conduits. That was my first clue. The infected seemed disturbed by proximity to electrical fields. I didn't understand the significance then, but that observation would later save my life. "We need to manually override the lockdown protocols," I told Garcia. "If we can seal off the unaffected areas—" An alarm blared, cutting me off. The security doors between prison blocks had begun opening automatically, one after another. The entire containment system was failing. "That's not supposed to happen," Garcia whispered. "The failsafes should lock everything down, not open it up." I knew he was right. Someone or something had reversed our safety protocols. Instead of containing the threat, our systems were allowing it to spread. "I need to get to the electrical maintenance shop," I said. "I might be able to isolate sections of the prison from there." Garcia nodded, his hand moving to his sidearm. "I'll come with you. The armory is on the way. We'll need weapons." As we left the control room, I caught a glimpse of the security feed from the town of Ravensridge. The same chaos was unfolding there. Cars crashed in the streets, people running, fighting, falling. The infection hadn't just breached the prison, it had already escaped into the world beyond our walls. What I didn't know then was that High Rock wasn't just the site of an outbreak. It was the epicenter. Patient Zero was inside our walls. And by nightfall, the world as we knew it would no longer exist. Garcia and I never made it to the armory. Halfway there, the emergency lights failed completely, plunging the corridor into darkness. I had my flashlight, but its beam only made the shadows deeper. We could hear them coming before we saw them, a wet, shuffling sound punctuated by guttural moans that weren't quite human anymore. "We need an alternate route," I whispered to Garcia. "Service Tunnel B runs parallel to this corridor. There's an access panel about 20 feet ahead." The beam of my flashlight caught movement at the far end of the hallway, 3 figures stumbling toward us. One was wearing a guard's uniform, but his movements were wrong, jerky and uncoordinated. Dark fluid dripped from his mouth and the front of his shirt was slick with it. "That's Mendez," Garcia said, his voice cracking. "We trained together at the academy." Mendez had been transformed. His eyes were clouded white, unseeing, yet somehow still tracking our movements. The other 2 infected were inmates I recognized, Miller from the kitchen detail and Sanchez from janitorial. All 3 moved with the same broken puppet motion, their heads twitching erratically. We backed up slowly toward the service tunnel entrance. I kept my light trained on them, noticing how they seemed to recoil slightly when the beam hit their eyes. It wasn't enough to stop them, but they definitely reacted to the electrical charge of the flashlight. I managed to get the service panel open, and we slipped inside just as they broke into a shambling run. Garcia sealed the panel behind us, and we heard them pounding against it from the other side. "What the hell are they?" he asked as we crawled through the narrow maintenance tunnel. "I don't know," I admitted, "but they're spreading fast, and they seem affected by electrical currents." The maintenance tunnel led us out near the eastern cell block, which housed minimum security inmates. The block seemed relatively untouched by the chaos, but the inmates were pressed against their cell doors, calling out for information. "What's happening out there?" one shouted as we passed. "We heard the alarms." Garcia ignored them, but I couldn't. "Stay in your cells," I called back. "Something's wrong with the power systems. We're working on it." It wasn't entirely a lie. I just omitted the part about their fellow inmates turning into monsters. As we approached the electrical maintenance shop, I heard a noise from inside, metal scraping against concrete. Garcia drew his sidearm, motioning for me to stay back. I ignored him, pushing past to unlock the door with my master key. "It's probably Jerry," I said. "My assistant was scheduled for inventory today." I was right. Jerry was there, barricaded behind a workbench, clutching a pipe wrench like a weapon. His eyes were wide with panic, and he'd been crying. "Thorne? Thank God," he gasped when he saw me. "They're everywhere. I tried radioing for help, but communications are down." "What happened to the backup generators?" I asked him, immediately moving to check our equipment stores. "They started like they were supposed to, then just died. I've never seen anything like it. It's like something fried all the circuits simultaneously. Even the isolators failed. That wasn't possible unless someone had deliberately sabotaged the system or an electromagnetic pulse had hit us. Given the bizarre lightning storm, the latter seemed more likely. I began gathering critical supplies: battery packs, portable voltage meters, wire cutters, insulated gloves, and my specialized toolkit. Garcia watched the door while I worked. "We need a plan, Thorne," he said. "The warden was in administration when this started. If anyone knows what's happening, it's him." I shook my head. "Administration is across the yard, through the most exposed part of the prison. We'd never make it. Right now, we need to establish a secure location and try to restore power to at least one section." "And then what?" Jerry asked. "Wait for help? Who's even coming?" It was a good question. If what we'd seen on the monitors was accurate, Ravens Ridge itself was already overwhelmed. How far had this thing spread? Was the entire county affected? The state? "One problem at a time," I told him. "First, we secure ourselves. Then, we try to contact the outside world." I laid out the equipment we'd need to create an electrical barrier. The theory was simple. If the infected reacted negatively to electrical currents, we could use that to keep them at bay. I'd noticed how they twitched when passing near powered conduits, how they seemed momentarily disoriented. "We can use the prison's emergency conductor lines to create a perimeter," I explained. "Run current through them at a specific frequency. Not enough to kill, but enough to repel the infected." "If they're still alive," Garcia muttered. "Whatever Mendez is now, he's not human anymore." While we gathered supplies, we heard more alarms from different sections of the prison. The infected were spreading, block by block. The sounds of gunfire indicated some guards were still fighting, but the diminishing frequency told its own story. Jerry had the emergency radio out, scanning for broadcasts. Most channels were static, but we caught fragments of emergency services communications. The situation in town was deteriorating rapidly. The hospital had been completely overrun. Police were setting up barricades at major intersections. The National Guard had been requested but hadn't arrived. "Wait, go back," I said when a particular frequency caught my attention. It was the prison's dedicated emergency channel, which should have been silent with our communications tower down. A voice cut through the static. "This is Warden Keller. If anyone can hear this, I'm in the administration building with several staff members. We have wounded. The situation is critical. The main gates have been breached from the outside. I repeat, external containment has failed." Garcia grabbed the radio. "Warden, this is Garcia. I'm with Thorne and his assistant in the electrical maintenance shop." "What are your orders, sir?" The response came through broken and distorted. "Garcia, thank God. We need to implement Emergency Protocol 7 immediately. Do you understand?" "Protocol 7. Garcia's face went white. "Sir, that protocol is for complete facility purge. We still have uninfected staff and inmates." "It's too late for that," the warden replied. "We've received word from the State Emergency Command. This infection has spread to 3 counties already. High Rock has been designated as Ground Zero. Protocol 7 must be initiated." The transmission cut off abruptly. Garcia stared at the radio, then at me. "What's Protocol 7? I asked. "Something that was never supposed to be used," he replied grimly. "Complete electrical overload followed by incineration of the facility. It was designed as a last resort for a terrorist attack or catastrophic riot. The prison has explosive charges built into its structural supports." That was news to me. In 10 years of maintaining High Rock's systems, I'd never been told about explosives in the infrastructure. "Where's the trigger mechanism?" I asked. "Main control room in the central tower. It requires the warden's authorization code plus 2 security officers." I processed this information quickly. If the warden was preparing to destroy the entire prison, the situation was even worse than I'd thought. But the protocol required electrical systems to be operational, and ours were completely down. "He can't activate it," I realized, "not without power to the control systems, which means we have time to find another solution." Just then, Jerry, who had been watching the corridor through a small observation window, hissed a warning. "Something's coming. Multiple contacts. We doused our lights immediately. Through the darkness, I could make out shapes moving past our door. At least 5 infected, moving with that distinctive broken gait. They paused near our door, heads tilting as if listening or sensing something. One of them pressed against the door, testing it. I recognized him even in the dim emergency light, Jackson, an inmate who had helped me repair shower plumbing just last week. Now his face was slack, eyes milky, a chunk missing from his neck where something had torn out his throat. Yet he was still moving, still hunting. Then I noticed something peculiar. Jackson kept reaching for the metal doorknob but pulling back before making contact, as if the proximity was causing him discomfort. The door had an electronic lock system, currently inactive, but the metal component still held a slight residual charge. The infected lingered for what felt like hours but was probably only minutes before shuffling away. Once they were gone, I turned to Garcia and Jerry. "Did you see that? They're avoiding direct contact with certain metals, specifically metals connected to our electrical grid, even inactive ones. How does that help us?" Jerry asked. "It's our way out," I said, my mind racing with possibilities. If we can generate enough current through the prison's existing infrastructure, we might be able to create safe corridors, pathways the infected won't cross. Garcia looked skeptical. "With what power source? The generators are fried." I moved to the back of the maintenance shop, to a cabinet that only I and the warden had keys for. Inside were emergency battery packs, specially designed high-capacity units meant for critical system restoration. "We don't need to power the whole prison," I explained as I pulled out the batteries, "just enough to create a path to the power distribution center. From there, we might be able to get one generator back online." We were preparing to leave the maintenance shop when we heard gunfire. Close, probably in the adjacent corridor. Garcia immediately moved to the door, weapon ready. I grabbed his arm. "Wait," I whispered. "We don't know who's shooting or at what." "Exactly why we need to check," he insisted. "Could be other guards." Against my better judgment, we cracked the door open. 2 guards were retreating down the corridor, firing at a group of infected pursuing them. One guard I recognized as Rodriguez, a veteran officer who'd been at High Rock even longer than me. The other was younger. Diaz, I thought his name was. "Rodriguez!" Garcia called out, waving them toward our position. "In here!" The guards changed direction, sprinting toward our door. The infected followed, moving faster than I expected. Some were lurching awkwardly, but others, the more recently turned, moved with frightening speed. Rodriguez and Diaz dove through our door, and we slammed it shut behind them. Jerry and I immediately pushed a heavy metal cabinet against it as the infected began pounding from the other side. "Will that hold?" Jerry asked, his voice shaking. "Long enough for us to get out the back way," I said, pointing to the maintenance tunnel access in the rear of the shop. Rodriguez was bleeding from a cut on his forehead, but otherwise both guards seemed unbitten. "What the hell is happening, Thorne?" he demanded. "Half the staff is either dead or turned into those things." "No idea," I admitted. "But they react to electrical currents. I think we can use that to our advantage." I quickly outlined my plan to reach the power distribution center. Rodriguez nodded grimly as I explained. "We were headed to Armory B," he said. "Thought we could secure weapons, maybe find more survivors." "Any word from the warden?" Garcia asked. Rodriguez's expression darkened. "Last I heard, he was in administration with a security detail. But that was before Cell Block C was breached. The inmates there, the ones that haven't turned, they've armed themselves with whatever they could find." This complicated things. Now we had 3 threats to deal with: the infected, potentially hostile inmates, and the structural instability of a prison in chaos. "We need to move," I said as the banging on the door intensified. "The maintenance tunnel comes out near the east yard. From there we can reach the power distribution center through the underground conduit access." As we gathered our supplies, Jerry pulled me aside. "The schematics are missing," he whispered, gesturing to the file cabinet where we kept detailed maps of the prison's electrical grid. "What do you mean, missing?" "I was looking for them earlier when the first alarms went off. The whole folder's gone, all the backup copies too." That was troubling. Those schematics contained information about every power line, junction box, and circuit in High Rock. Without them, navigating the electrical system would be much harder. More concerning was who might have taken them and why. "We'll have to rely on memory," I told Jerry. "No one knows the system better than us anyway." We entered the maintenance tunnel one by one, with Garcia taking point and Rodriguez covering our rear. The tunnel was narrow, barely wide enough for a person to crawl through, and designed for accessing wiring between sections of the prison. Emergency lights were spaced every 20 feet, casting long shadows. "How far to the east yard?" Diaz whispered. "About 200 feet, I replied. "Stay quiet. Sound carries in these tunnels." We moved slowly, listening for any signs of infected in the connecting passageways. I tried not to think about how perfectly these tunnels could channel the infection through the prison, like blood vessels carrying a virus. Halfway to our destination, we heard voices ahead, human voices, not the animalistic groans of the infected. We paused, weapons ready. "Probably inmates," Rodriguez whispered. "The east yard connects to minimum security." I moved forward cautiously until I could see through the grate at the tunnel's end. 3 inmates were huddled there, barricading the exit with broken furniture. They weren't acting aggressively. They were scared, trying to protect themselves. I recognized one of them, Vasquez, serving 5 years for armed robbery. He'd worked with me on electrical repairs in the kitchen last month, a competent assistant despite his criminal background. "Vasquez," I called softly through the grate. "It's Thorne, from maintenance." He spun around, a makeshift knife in his hand. When he saw me, relief flooded his face. "Thorne? Man, am I glad to see you. These things are everywhere." Wilson and his crew turned first, then the guards on duty. "It's spreading through the whole block." I noticed Garcia and Rodriguez tense at the mention of other inmates. They still saw clear lines, staff versus prisoners, but those divisions seemed meaningless now. "We're trying to reach the power distribution center," I explained. "Restore some of the electrical systems. We have a theory that electricity affects the infected." Vasquez nodded eagerly. "We noticed that too. They won't go near the backup emergency lights. It's like they can sense the current." "We need to get through this exit," I said. "Can you help us?" Vasquez looked at his companions, then back at me. "You taking us with you?" It was a fair question. I glanced at Garcia, whose expression made his opinion clear. Leave them. But I couldn't do that. Not if there was a chance of saving more lives. "Yes," I said firmly, "if you help us." Garcia started to protest, but Rodriguez cut him off. "He's right. We need all the help we can get." With the inmates' assistance, we cleared the barricade and emerged into the east yard. The scene was chaotic. The yard, normally used for minimum security recreation, was littered with bodies. Some still, others in the process of turning. A group of infected were feeding on a fallen guard near the perimeter fence. They hadn't noticed us yet. "The distribution center is in that building," I whispered, pointing to a low concrete structure at the eastern edge of the yard. "We need to cross about 50 yards of open space." "We'll never make it without drawing attention," Diaz said. I pulled out one of the battery packs from my bag. "We might not need to. If my theory is correct, we can use this to create a temporary repellent field." Working quickly, I connected the battery to a length of copper wire. The current flowing through the wire would create a weak electromagnetic field. Not enough to harm humans, but possibly enough to deter the infected based on what we'd observed. "Everyone stay close to me," I instructed. "Within 3 feet of this wire. Move slowly and quietly." We formed a tight group around the charged wire and began crossing the yard. The infected nearest to us seemed to sense the electrical field, their heads turning in our direction. But instead of charging, they backed away, making that same twitching motion I'd noticed before. It was working. We were halfway across the yard when we heard shouting from the cell block windows overlooking the area. Uninfected inmates were calling out to us, begging for help. The noise drew the attention of more infected who began converging from other parts of the yard. "Move faster," Garcia urged. "They're coming from all sides." We picked up our pace, the electrical field still keeping the nearest infected at bay. But there were too many, and the battery wouldn't last forever. 20 feet from the distribution center, the first infected broke through our perimeter, lunging at Diaz. Rodriguez fired a single shot, dropping the infected instantly. The gunshot echoed across the yard, drawing even more attention. "Run!" I shouted. "Now!" We abandoned stealth and sprinted for the distribution center door. Garcia reached it first, fumbling with the keys as infected closed in from all sides. Rodriguez and Vasquez formed a defensive line, striking back any that got too close. Finally, the door opened and we piled inside. Jerry and I slammed it shut as bodies crashed against the other side. The reinforced steel would hold, but we were trapped until we found another way out. "Everyone okay?" "Anyone bitten?" I asked, scanning the group. "All clear, thankfully." We had made it to the distribution center, the heart of High Rock's electrical grid. If there was any hope of restoring power and creating a safe zone, it would start here. The distribution center was a maze of conduits, circuit breakers, and transformers. Under normal circumstances, it hummed with electricity, but now it was silent and dark. I moved to the main control panel using my flashlight to examine the components. "This isn't good," I muttered, seeing the damage. The surge from the lightning strike had melted several critical junctions. The main transformer was completely destroyed. "Can you fix it?" Jerry asked, coming to stand beside me. "Not completely, but we might be able to reroute power to specific sections using the emergency bus." I began tracing the power lines, mentally mapping which systems could still be salvaged. As I worked, I noticed something strange: tool marks on one of the access panels. This panel had been opened recently and not by maintenance staff. "Someone's been in here," I said, showing Jerry the marks. "Before the outbreak, these screws were loosened and retightened by someone in a hurry." "Sabotage?" Garcia asked, coming over to look. "Maybe. Or they were looking for something." I continued examining the panel and found what I was looking for: a small junction box that shouldn't have been there, wired into our main communications relay. "What is that?" Jerry asked. "Some kind of signal booster. Not standard equipment." I carefully disconnected it, turning it over in my hands. There were no identifying marks, but the craftsmanship was military grade. "Government?" Rodriguez suggested. "Possibly." I set the device aside, my mind racing. Why would someone install unauthorized equipment in our power grid? And what was it designed to amplify? Questions about the mysterious device would have to wait. Our immediate priority was establishing a safe zone, and that meant getting at least part of the electrical system back online. I directed everyone to specific tasks based on their knowledge and abilities. "Jerry, check the backup relay circuits. See if any are still functional," I said. "Garcia and Rodriguez, secure the perimeter. We need warning if those things find another way in. Vasquez and your friends, help me with the main distribution panel." Working by flashlight, I began the painstaking process of bypassing the damaged components and creating a new power pathway. The prison's electrical system wasn't designed for this kind of piecemeal restoration, but I'd spent years learning all its quirks and workarounds. "Hand me that insulated wire cutter," I said to Vasquez. He seemed eager to help, watching intently as I worked. "You really think electricity hurts these things?" he asked quietly. "Not hurts exactly. It disrupts them somehow. Like their nervous systems are hypersensitive to electrical current." I connected 2 wires, careful to avoid creating a spark. Whatever changed them also changed how they interact with electrical fields. After an hour of intricate work, I had managed to create a bypass circuit that could redirect power from our emergency batteries to specific sections of the prison. It wouldn't be much, enough for lights and basic security systems in one cell block, but it was a start. "Ready for a test run," I announced. "Everyone stand clear of the panel." I connected the final wire and flipped the emergency switch. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, with a low hum, the auxiliary lights in the distribution center flickered to life. The main status board illuminated, showing which systems were now receiving power. "It worked," Jerry said, sounding almost shocked. "You actually did it. Don't celebrate yet. We're just powering cell block A right now, and only the essential systems. The batteries will last maybe 12 hours at this rate." Garcia returned from checking the perimeter. "Security door to the west corridor is clear, but we've got at least 15 infected in the yard. They're congregating near the fence line now, away from the building." They can sense the power coming back online, I realized. They're retreating from it. This confirmed my theory and gave me an idea. If we can establish a perimeter of electrified barriers, we might be able to create a safe zone large enough for survivors. Rodriguez looked skeptical. "How many survivors you think are left?" "We haven't heard from anyone else in hours. We can't be the only ones," I insisted. "There are 300 inmates and 50 staff in this prison. They can't all be infected." I turned my attention to the prison's floor plan displayed on the wall. With the limited power we had, we could secure cell block A and the connecting corridor to the kitchen and infirmary. It would create a defensible area with access to basic necessities. "This is our target zone," I said, tracing the boundaries. "If we can get there and secure it, we'll have shelter, food, and medical supplies." "What about weapons?" Diaz asked. "Armory B is near the infirmary." "We include it in the perimeter," I agreed. "But we need to move fast. The longer we wait, the more infected we'll have to deal with." I began preparing electrical deterrent devices using the battery packs and copper wire. Each person would carry one, creating a mobile barrier that should keep the infected at a distance. It wasn't perfect, but it was better than nothing. "Everyone take one of these," I said, distributing the devices. "Keep them active at all times. Stay within 5 feet of each other to maintain an overlapping field." Garcia checked his weapon. "How do we kill these things?" "Headshots like in the movies." "Severe trauma to any part of the body seems to work," Rodriguez replied. "But they don't go down easy. Better to avoid engagement if possible." With our electrical deterrents active and weapons ready, we prepared to leave the distribution center. Our path would take us through the maintenance corridor, across the interior courtyard, and into cell block A. Under normal circumstances, it would be a 5-minute walk. Today, it might as well be miles. I took point, with Jerry close behind me. The inmates followed, with Garcia and Rodriguez covering our rear. We moved in tight formation, the electrical field surrounding us like an invisible shield. The maintenance corridor was clear, the emergency lights casting long shadows as we advanced. I could hear movement behind the walls, infected in adjacent corridors, sensing our presence but unable to reach us. We reached the interior courtyard without incident. Unlike the East Yard, this area was enclosed on all sides by prison buildings. It had been the site of fierce fighting early in the outbreak, judging by the bodies scattered across the ground. Some of the dead were still moving, crawling aimlessly with shattered limbs. "Stay focused," I warned as we entered the open space. "Cross quickly, single file." We were halfway across when the first real test of our electrical deterrence came. 3 infected emerged from a doorway to our left, former guards still wearing tattered uniforms. They charged toward us, but pulled up short as they hit the edge of our electrical field, their bodies convulsing. "It's working," Jerry whispered in awe. "They can't get through." The infected circled us, hissing and snarling, testing different approaches but always stopping at the same invisible barrier. We continued moving, maintaining our tight formation. The courtyard exit was just ahead, a reinforced door leading to cell block A. I reached the door first, unlocking it with my master key. One by one, our group filed through into the relative safety of the corridor beyond. As Diaz, the last one, crossed the threshold, I slammed the door shut and engaged the electronic lock, now functional with our restored power. Cell block A was eerily quiet. This section housed administrative segregation, prisoners kept isolated from the general population. Each cell was a self-contained unit with its own locking mechanism. If any inmates had been locked inside when the power failed, they would still be there. "Check each cell," I instructed. "Look for survivors, but be careful. Some might be infected." We moved down the block systematically, peering into each cell. Most were empty, their occupants presumably released during the initial chaos. A few contained infected inmates pounding futilely against their cell doors. And in 3 cells we found survivors, terrified men who had chosen to stay locked up rather than face what was outside. "Are you here to get us out?" one asked as we approached his cell. "That depends," Garcia replied. "Are you going to be a problem?" The inmate shook his head vehemently. "No, sir. Not with those things out there. I'll follow any orders you give." We released the 3 survivors, who introduced themselves as Mills, Cooper, and Tanner. None were violent offenders, all serving short sentences for drug-related crimes. They were scared, but coherent and grateful to be alive. Our group now numbered 12, a mix of guards, inmates, and maintenance staff united by the simple desire to survive. I led them to the cell block's central control room, which offered a panoramic view of the entire floor. With power restored to this section, we had working cameras, lights, and electronic locks. It wasn't much, but it was a start. "We can expand the safe zone from here," I explained, showing them the security monitors. "The infirmary is our next priority, then the kitchen and armory." "What about other survivors?" Cooper asked. "My cellmate was taken to the infirmary yesterday. He could still be alive." "We'll check every area we secure," I promised, "but our resources are limited. We have to be strategic." As I was outlining our next steps, one of the security monitors caught my attention. It showed the administration building across the main yard, and there was light in the windows. Someone had power over there. "That's impossible," Jerry said, following my gaze. "The admin building is on the same grid as everything else. It should be dark." "Unless they have their own power source," I realized. "Something independent of the main system." I zoomed in the camera, trying to get a better view. The image was grainy, but I could make out movement inside the warden's office. Multiple figures, some in what looked like hazmat suits. "What the hell?" Garcia muttered, leaning closer to the monitor. "Is that a government response team? If it is, why haven't they come looking for survivors?" Rodriguez asked, the suspicion clear in his voice. It was a good question. The administration building was less than 300 yards from our position. If a rescue team had arrived, they should be sweeping the prison, not holed up in the warden's office. "We need to contact them," I decided. "The admin building has a direct line to the State Emergency Command. If anyone knows what's happening outside these walls, it's them." "How do we get there?" Jerry asked. "The main yard is crawling with infected." I considered our options. The underground maintenance tunnels extended to most parts of the prison, including a utility room in the administration building's basement. It would be tight and dangerous, but possible. We use the tunnels, I said. A small team, fast and quiet. 3 people, no more. I'm going, Garcia stated immediately. Me too, Vasquez added, surprising everyone. When we looked at him questioningly, he shrugged. I worked in that building on trustee detail. I know the layout better than most of you. Despite Garcia's obvious distrust of the inmate, he couldn't argue with the logic. I would lead, with Garcia and Vasquez accompanying me. The others would stay behind to secure our foothold in cell block A and prepare the infirmary for our return. As we gathered supplies for the mission, Jerry pulled me aside. I don't trust what's happening in that building, he whispered. First the missing schematics, then that device in the distribution center, now mysterious people in the warden's office. Something feels wrong. I know, I agreed. But we need answers, and right now, that's our best lead. I checked the electrical deterrent devices, ensuring they were fully charged. If we encountered infected in the confined space of the tunnels, our only advantage would be the electrical field and our wits. Ready? I asked my companions. They nodded grimly. I opened the access panel to the maintenance tunnel, revealing the dark passage beyond. Whatever awaited us in the administration building, I couldn't shake the feeling that it would change everything we thought we knew about the outbreak. The answers were close, but so was the danger. The maintenance tunnel leading to the administration building was narrower than the others, barely wide enough for us to crawl through single file. I led the way, with Vasquez behind me and Garcia bringing up the rear. Our electrical deterrents created a faint blue glow in the darkness, casting strange shadows on the concrete walls. How much farther? Garcia whispered after we'd been crawling for what felt like hours, but was probably only 20 minutes. Another 100 feet to the junction point, I replied. Then we go vertical for 2 levels. The prison's maintenance tunnels formed a complex network beneath the facility, designed to provide access to utilities without disrupting security operations. Few people knew the full layout. Even I had sections I'd never explored, marked as restricted on the official schematics. We reached the junction point without incident, a small chamber where several tunnels converged. A metal ladder led upward, disappearing into darkness. Administration building is 2 levels up, I said. Utility room should connect directly to the basement corridor. As we prepared to climb, Vasquez suddenly stiffened. Listen, he hissed. At first I heard nothing. Then it came. A faint scratching sound from one of the connecting tunnels. Something was moving toward us, dragging itself through the narrow passage. We need to move, Garcia said, his hand moving to his weapon. Now. I went up the ladder first, climbing as quickly and quietly as possible. Vasquez followed, with Garcia close behind. The scratching grew louder, accompanied by the wet, gurgling moans we'd come to associate with the infected. We emerged into the utility room just as the sounds reached the chamber below. I slammed the access hatch shut and secured it with a metal pipe through the handle. It wouldn't hold forever, but it might buy us time if we needed to retreat. The utility room was small and cramped, filled with electrical panels and water system controls. A single door led to the basement corridor beyond. I pressed my ear against it, listening for movement. Seems clear, I whispered. Remember the plan. We get to the 2nd floor, check the warden's office, and get out. No heroics. Garcia nodded grimly. Vasquez looked nervous but determined. I cracked the door open and peered into the dimly lit corridor. Emergency lights cast a faint glow, revealing an empty hallway lined with storage rooms. We moved quickly but cautiously, our electrical deterrents creating a protective bubble around us. The administration building seemed unnaturally quiet compared to the chaos we'd witnessed elsewhere. No signs of struggle, no bodies, no blood. It was as if this section had been completely isolated from the outbreak, At the end of the corridor, a stairwell led upward. The door was locked, unusual for an emergency exit. "Someone's been securing the building," Garcia noted as I used my master key to open it. The stairwell was clear, and we ascended to the second floor without incident. Through the fire door window, I could see the main administrative area, a large open space with cubicles and offices surrounding the warden's private suite, and there was light coming from those offices. Real electric light, not emergency backups or flashlights. Someone had fully functional power. "How is that possible?" Vasquez whispered. "The whole grid is down." "They must have an independent generator," I replied, "something separate from the prison's main system." We entered the main area carefully, staying low and moving between cubicles for cover. As we got closer to the warden's office, I could hear voices, multiple people engaged in heated discussion. "The containment protocol was compromised," someone was saying. "Patient Zero was supposed to remain isolated in the medical wing. How did he get access to the general population?" Another voice responded, calmer and more authoritative. "The lightning strike wasn't supposed to disable all systems simultaneously. The electrical surge exceeded our models. We lost containment when the automated doors malfunctioned." I exchanged glances with Garcia, whose expression had darkened. These weren't rescue workers. This sounded like people who knew what was happening before it happened. We edged closer until we could see into the warden's office through the partially open door. Inside were 4 people. Warden Keller sat behind his desk, looking pale and exhausted. Beside him stood a woman in a lab coat, monitoring equipment set up on a side table. 2 men in military-style uniforms stood near the window, looking out at the prison yard. "The experiment parameters have changed," the woman was saying, "but the data is still valuable. The subjects are responding to electrical stimuli exactly as predicted." "Subjects?" Warden Keller repeated, his voice hollow. "They were people, Doctor. My staff, prisoners under my care. They're test cases now," one of the military men replied coldly. "And right now, they're proving the concept works. The electromagnetic pulse alters neural pathways, creating hypersensitivity to electrical currents, while simultaneously increasing aggression and eliminating higher brain function." I felt sick listening to them. This wasn't a natural disaster or even a terrorist attack. It was an experiment, a deliberate action. Garcia's face had gone rigid with fury. Before I could stop him, he stood up and stepped into the doorway, weapon raised. "Federal agents," he announced, badge in one hand, gun in the other. "Everyone freeze." The military men spun around, reaching for their sidearms, but stopped when they saw Garcia's weapon already trained on them. "Officer Garcia," Warden Keller said, looking surprised and almost relieved. "You're alive." "No thanks to you, sir," Garcia replied bitterly. "We heard your transmission about Protocol 7. Were you going to warn the survivors before you incinerated the place?" I stepped into the room behind Garcia, with Vasquez covering our rear. The woman in the lab coat stared at us with clinical interest, her eyes fixing on our electrical deterrent devices. "Fascinating," she murmured. "You've weaponized the same principle we were testing. The electrical field repels the infected." "Who are you people?" I demanded. "What have you done?" The older of the 2 military men straightened his posture. "I'm Colonel Hargrove, Department of Defense Advanced Research. This is a classified operation. You need to stand down, both of you." "Not happening," Garcia replied. "Start talking. What is this? What did you do to those people?" Warden Keller looked between us and the military personnel, then seemed to make a decision. "They were testing a new non-lethal crowd control technology," he said quietly. "Targeted electromagnetic pulses that could temporarily incapacitate riot participants. The prison volunteered to host a small-scale test on selected inmates." Volunteered, I repeated incredulously. You volunteered your prisoners as test subjects? It was supposed to be safe, the warden insisted. Temporary effects only. But something went wrong with the equipment during calibration. The pulse was amplified by the storm, and the wave spread beyond the test area. Patient 0, Wilson, was the first to transform. Within hours, it had spread throughout the medical wing. The woman in the lab coat stepped forward. I'm Dr. Eliza Crawford, project lead scientist. What we're seeing isn't what we designed. The electromagnetic pulse was meant to disrupt neural activity temporarily, causing disorientation and compliance. Instead, it's rewriting neural pathways permanently. The infected aren't dead, they're altered. Their brains now process electrical stimuli differently. That's why they avoid electrical fields, I realized, thinking of our observations. Their nervous systems are hypersensitive to electrical currents. Precisely, Doctor. Crawford nodded. And it's spreading like a contagion. The altered brain chemistry is transmissible through bodily fluids, primarily saliva and blood. One bite is enough to begin the transformation process. The implications were staggering. This wasn't a random outbreak or natural disaster. It was a human-made catastrophe born of arrogance and secrecy. How far has it spread? I asked, dreading the answer. Colonel Hargrove's expression tightened. Beyond our containment capabilities. The initial electromagnetic pulse affected a 3-mile radius. The infection itself has spread throughout Ravensridge and into neighboring counties. The governor has declared a state of emergency. Is there a cure? Garcia demanded. Dr. Crawford hesitated before responding. We're working on it. The process might be reversible with a precisely calibrated counterpulse. But we need more data, more test subjects. Vasquez, who had been silent until now, spoke up. Test subjects? You mean survivors you can experiment on? We need to understand the transformation process, Dr. Crawford replied defensively. It's the only way to develop a cure. Warden Keller stood up suddenly. Enough. These men deserve the truth. There is no cure being developed yet. The priority right now is containment, not treatment. The military has established a quarantine perimeter around the entire county. No one in or out. Colonel Hargrove glared at the warden. That information is classified, Keller. Not anymore, the warden replied. He looked exhausted, a man carrying an impossible burden. I've followed your protocols. I've lied to my staff. I've watched people under my protection die horribly. No more. The colonel's hand moved slightly toward his weapon. I tensed, ready for violence to erupt, but the warden's next words froze everyone. I've been bitten, he announced quietly. About an hour ago, when we were securing this building. I've been taking stimulants to slow the progression, but it's just a matter of time. Dr. Crawford immediately moved away from him, her clinical detachment replacing any human compassion. How long ago exactly? What symptoms are you experiencing? Does it matter? The warden asked bitterly. I've seen what happens. I know where this ends. I studied the warden carefully. His skin was pale and clammy, but his eyes were still clear. No sign of the milky transformation we'd seen in others. Yet something was different about him. A subtle tension in his movements, as if he was fighting against his own body. We need to get back to our people, I said to Garcia. They need to know what we're dealing with. Garcia nodded, never lowering his weapon. What about them? They're coming with us, I decided. We need what they know, and they need our protection if they want to survive the night. Colonel Hargrove laughed coldly. Protection? From what? We have secure communications, weapons, and a generator. We're safer here than anywhere. As if in response to his words, the building's lights flickered once, twice, and then went out completely. The emergency backup kicked in seconds later, casting the room in that same eerie red glow we'd seen throughout the prison. "What happened?" Dr. Crawford demanded, moving to check her equipment. "Power surge," the warden said, looking at me. "The main generator must have failed." I knew better. This wasn't a random failure. Something had just changed in our fragile equation, and my instincts screamed danger. "We need to move," I said urgently. "Now!" The security monitors on the warden's desk flickered to life, displaying feeds from around the prison. What they showed confirmed my worst fears. The infected were converging on the administration building from all directions, moving with purpose rather than their usual erratic patterns. "They're coming here specifically," I said, pointing to the screens. "Look at their movement. It's coordinated." Dr. Crawford pushed past me to study the monitors, her scientific detachment momentarily replaced by fear. "This shouldn't be possible. The infected don't have the cognitive capacity for coordinated action." "Tell them that," Garcia muttered, watching dozens of figures shambling across the yard toward our position. Colonel Hargrove grabbed a radio from his belt. "Extraction team, this is Hargrove. We need immediate evacuation from the administration building. Protocol Omega. Repeat, Protocol Omega." The response came through broken and distorted. "Negative on extraction, Colonel. Perimeter defenses compromised. All air assets grounded due to electrical atmospheric disturbance. Hold position until dawn." The colonel's face hardened. "That's 7 hours from now. We won't last 7 minutes if those things get in here." I studied the security feeds, noticing something odd about the infected's behavior. They weren't just converging on our building, they were following a specific figure. A tall, gaunt man in tattered prison scrubs moving more deliberately than the others. "Who is that?" I asked, pointing to the monitor. The warden squinted at the screen. "Wilson. Inmate 4587. He was patient 0. "He's leading them," Vasquez observed, "like he knows exactly where to go." Dr. Crawford moved closer to the screen, her expression a mix of scientific fascination and horror. "This confirms our secondary hypothesis. The primary infected retain higher cognitive function than subsequent cases. Wilson was directly exposed to the initial pulse. His transformation is different." "He can control the others?" I asked. "Not control exactly, but influence perhaps. We theorized a hive mind component could develop in subjects with the right neural architecture." The implications were terrifying. Not just mindless infected, but an intelligent force directing them. And somehow, Wilson knew exactly where to find us. "We need to get back to Cell Block A," I insisted. "Our group has established a defensible position with electrical barriers. It's our best chance." The colonel looked skeptical, but seemed to be weighing our limited options. "How far is it?" 300 yards across the main yard, then through the east corridor. With our electrical deterrence, we might make it." "Might isn't good enough," Hargrove replied. "My team came in with advanced equipment. We have prototype electrical pulse weapons in the security office downstairs. They're designed to incapacitate the infected without killing them." "For your experiments," Garcia said bitterly. "For containment," the colonel shot back. "Right now, they're our best chance of reaching your safe zone." I made a quick decision. "Vasquez, go with the colonel to retrieve these weapons. Garcia, stay here with the warden and doctor. Crawford, I'll check the building's security measures, see if we can delay the infected's entry." We split up, working against the clock as the infected drew closer to the building. I moved through the administrative offices, securing doors and windows. Most had electronic locks that were still functioning on emergency power, but several had been damaged during the initial chaos. I found a maintenance panel near the main entrance and accessed the building's security systems. The administrative wing had been designed with riot control in mind, including steel shutters that could seal off windows and doorways. With emergency powers still functioning, I could activate them remotely. When I returned to the warden's office, Colonel Hargrove and Vasquez had rejoined us, carrying several rifle-like devices with glowing blue power cells. Electromagnetic pulse rifles, the colonel explained, handing one to Garcia and me. They emit a focused electrical field that disrupts the infected's neural pathways. Won't kill them, but it'll drop them for several minutes. We've got a bigger problem, the warden announced, pointing to the security monitors. The infected had reached the building and were gathered around the main entrance with Wilson at the center of the group. Rather than attempting to break in immediately, they seemed to be waiting. "What are they doing?" Garcia asked. "Gathering strength," Dr. Crawford suggested. "Or perhaps Wilson is assessing the building's defenses." As we watched, Wilson approached one of the exterior security cameras. His movements were jerky but purposeful. He stared directly into the lens, his milky eyes somehow finding ours across the digital divide. Then he smiled, a horrible parody of human expression. He knows we're watching, I realized. He knows who we are. "Impossible," Dr. Crawford insisted. "The infection destroys higher brain functions. Memory, recognition, strategic thinking, all gone." "Then how do you explain that?" Garcia demanded, pointing at the monitor where Wilson was now deliberately placing his hands on the building's external power junction box. We watched in horror as Wilson began manipulating the controls. His movements were clumsy but effective, like a man remembering a skill from muscle memory. "He's trying to cut the building's power," I said. "He knows the emergency systems are keeping them out." The warden turned to me, his expression grim. "Wilson worked in the electrical shop before his transfer to maximum security. He was part of the maintenance crew for 5 years. That explained it. Even with his mind ravaged by the infection, some part of Wilson remembered his training, enough to recognize power systems and how to disable them." "We need to move now," I urged, "before he succeeds." As if on cue, the emergency lights flickered and died. A second later they returned, but weaker than before. The building's backup power was failing. "Everyone grab a weapon and stay close," the colonel ordered. "We move as a group through the east exit. It's our clearest path to cell block A." I checked my electrical deterrent device, making sure it was still functioning. The portable units should still work even if the building's power failed completely. Our small team formed up, with the colonel and Garcia taking point, the warden and Dr. Crawford in the middle, and Vasquez and I covering the rear. We moved swiftly through the darkened hallways toward the east exit. Through windows, I could see infected still gathering around the main entrance, drawn by Wilson's silent commands. Our alternate route might give us the element of surprise. The east exit led to a small courtyard separated from the main yard by a chain-link fence. If we could cross it quickly, we might reach the maintenance access tunnel that connected to cell block A without having to cross the main yard. We reached the exit without incident, but when the colonel tried the door, it remained shut. "Electronic lock," he muttered. "It must have failed when the power fluctuated." I pushed forward, examining the lock mechanism. "I can bypass it manually. Give me a minute." While I worked on the lock, the others kept watch. The warden had grown visibly worse in the short time since his confession. His skin had taken on a grayish pallor, and his movements were becoming less coordinated. Dr. Crawford watched him with clinical detachment, taking notes on a small tablet. "How long does the transformation usually take?" Garcia asked her quietly. "Variable," she replied. "As little as 15 minutes for direct exposure cases. Several hours for those infected through bites. The warden is showing unusual resistance. It might be the stimulants he mentioned, or perhaps a natural immunity. The warden overheard her. "Not immune," he said, his voice rougher than before. "Just stubborn. Always have been." I felt the lock mechanism give way under my tools. "Got it," I announced. "Everyone ready?" Once we're outside, we move fast and quiet. No stopping until we reach the tunnel entrance. The colonel nodded, raising his pulse rifle. "On 3. 1, 2, 3. We burst through the door into the courtyard. The night air was cool and damp, carrying the metallic scent of the abnormal storm that had started all this. The courtyard appeared empty, but the fence separating us from the main yard was lined with infected, their fingers hooked through the chain links as they stared at us with hungry, milky eyes. "They can sense us," Dr. Crawford whispered, "but the fence is holding them back." "For now," the colonel replied grimly. "Move." We crossed the courtyard quickly, heading for the maintenance tunnel entrance located near the southeast corner. I was just starting to think we might make it when a figure stepped out from behind a storage shed blocking our path. It was Wilson. Somehow he had anticipated our escape route and circled around to intercept us. "That's impossible," the colonel hissed. "He couldn't have known." But I was beginning to understand. "The missing schematics," I said. "He has them. Or at least, he remembers them." Wilson stood unnaturally still, his head tilted as he observed us. Up close, the changes in him were even more disturbing. His skin had a strange grayish sheen, traced with dark, swollen veins like electrical circuits. His eyes were clouded but somehow still intelligent, focusing on each of us in turn. When his gaze landed on Dr. Crawford, a spark of recognition flashed across his face. His lips moved, forming what might have been words, though only a guttural moan emerged. "He recognizes you," I said to Crawford. "What exactly was your relationship with Patient Zero?" Before she could answer, Wilson let out a piercing howl that carried across the prison grounds. In response, the infected at the fence began climbing, pulling themselves over with unnatural strength and coordination. "Open fire," the colonel ordered, raising his pulse rifle. The weapons discharged with a high-pitched whine, sending waves of electrical energy toward Wilson and the approaching infected. The effect was immediate and dramatic. The lesser infected dropped to the ground, their bodies convulsing. But Wilson merely staggered back a few steps before regaining his balance. "Higher setting," the colonel barked, adjusting his weapon. "Maximum output." The second volley hit Wilson directly. This time he fell to his knees, his body shaking violently. But still, he did not go down completely. Instead, he raised his head, locked eyes with Dr. Crawford, and began crawling toward her with terrible determination. "Run!" I shouted, grabbing Crawford's arm and pulling her toward the tunnel entrance. "Everyone into the tunnel now." We raced for the access hatch, the colonel and Garcia providing covering fire as more infected poured over the fence. I reached the hatch first, wrenching it open and ushering the others inside. "Go, go, go," I urged as they descended one by one into the darkness below. Vasquez went next, followed by Dr. Crawford. The warden moved more slowly, his condition deteriorating by the minute. Garcia practically had to push him through the opening. "Colonel, your turn," I called, seeing Wilson regaining his feet now less than 20 yards away. Hargrove fired one more burst before backing toward us. "I'll cover your entry," he insisted. "Get in first." I hesitated only briefly before sliding into the tunnel. The metal ladder was slick with moisture, making the descent treacherous. I could hear the colonel above me, still firing his weapon. Then came a scream, short and abruptly cut off. Looking up, I saw the hatch still open, but no sign of the colonel. Only Wilson's face appeared in the opening, those milky eyes somehow finding mine in the darkness. "Close the hatch," Garcia shouted from below. "Now, Thorne." I reached up, straining to grab the hatch handle. Wilson's fingers appeared at the edge, grasping blindly. For a moment, we struggled for control, his inhuman strength against my desperate determination. Then a shot rang out from below, and Wilson's hand disappeared. I slammed the hatch shut and spun the locking wheel, sealing it. For now, we were safe. But the colonel was gone, and we still had a long journey ahead through the darkness. The maintenance tunnel was pitch black, our electrical deterrents providing the only illumination. We moved as quickly as possible, Garcia leading with his pulse rifle ready. The warden struggled to keep pace, his condition visibly worsening with each passing minute. "How far to cell block A?" Dr. Crawford asked, her scientific detachment cracking under the strain. "Quarter-mile through these tunnels," I replied, assuming the route is clear. That was a big assumption. If Wilson had access to the schematics, he might have already sent infected to intercept us along the way. I kept that concern to myself. No point adding to the group's anxiety. We hadn't gone far when we heard it, the distinctive sound of metal grinding against metal above us. The access hatch was being forced open. "Move faster," Garcia urged, his voice tight with tension. "They're coming after us." We picked up the pace, practically running through the narrow tunnel. The warden stumbled, nearly falling. Vasquez caught him, supporting his weight. "Leave me," the warden gasped. "I'm slowing you down, and I won't make it anyway." "No one gets left behind," I insisted, though I knew he was right about his condition. The transformation was accelerating. His skin had taken on the grayish hue we'd seen in the infected, and his movements were becoming increasingly uncoordinated. Dr. Crawford studied him with clinical interest, even as we fled. "Fascinating. He's fighting the neurological changes. Most subjects succumb to the viral component within hours, but he's maintaining cognitive function much longer." "I'm not your lab rat," the warden growled, a hint of his former authority surfacing through his pain. We reached a junction where the tunnel split in 3 directions. I hesitated, trying to orient myself. The prison's maintenance tunnels formed a labyrinth beneath the facility, and without the schematics, I was relying on memory alone. "This way," I decided, pointing to the right passage. "It connects to the east basement corridor, then up to cell block A." As we turned into the passage, Garcia suddenly raised his hand for silence. We froze, listening. At first I heard nothing. Then it came, the faint sound of movement ahead of us. Something was in the tunnel, blocking our path to safety. "Back up," Garcia whispered. "We'll take another route." But as we turned, we heard more sounds behind us. The infected had entered the tunnel system and were closing in from multiple directions. We were trapped. "Options, Thorne?" Garcia asked, his voice steady despite our dire situation. I quickly assessed our limited choices. There's a vertical access shaft 20 feet ahead. It leads to the generator room for cell block B. If we can reach it, we might be able to bypass whatever's ahead of us. It was a desperate plan, but our only hope. We moved forward cautiously, weapons ready. The sounds grew louder, the wet shuffling that had become the soundtrack to this nightmare. We reached the vertical shaft just as figures appeared at both ends of the tunnel. Infected prison staff and inmates moving with that distinctive, broken gait. They spotted us immediately, their moans echoing off the concrete walls as they closed in. "Up the ladder," I ordered, pulling open the access panel. "Now." Garcia went first, then Dr. Crawford. Vasquez helped the warden, practically lifting him onto the rungs. I waited until they were ascending before following, pulling the access panel closed behind me. The shaft was narrow and claustrophobic, the metal ladder slick with condensation. We climbed in silence, painfully aware of the sounds of pursuit from below. The infected had reached the access panel and were trying to open it. "Where does this lead exactly?" Dr. Crawford asked between labored breaths. "Generator room for cell block B," I replied. "It hasn't been used since the East Wing renovation last year. Should be empty." We reached the top of the shaft and emerged into a small, dusty room filled with decommissioned electrical equipment. A single reinforced door led out to the main corridor of cell block B. "Everyone catch your breath," I said, checking the pulse rifle the colonel had given me. Its power cell was depleted by half already. "We're not in the clear yet." The warden collapsed against a wall, his breathing ragged. Dr. Crawford knelt beside him, checking his vitals with analytical precision. "His neural patterns are degrading rapidly," she announced. "I estimate complete transformation within 30 minutes. The warden looked up at her, his eyes still lucid despite the infection ravaging his system. "When it happens," he said hoarsely, "don't hesitate. Don't let me become one of them." Garcia nodded grimly, a silent promise between men who understood duty. I moved to the door, listening for movement in the corridor beyond. "We need to reach cell block A. It's across the main hall from here. If we move quickly and quietly, we might make it." As I prepared to open the door, a crackling sound came from Garcia's radio, the one he'd taken from the colonel. A voice broke through the static, distorted but recognizable. "This is Emergency Response Command to all law enforcement personnel. Be advised, Operation Firestorm commences at dawn. All civilian evacuation must be complete by 0500 hours. Repeat, Operation Firestorm commences at dawn." Garcia grabbed the radio. "This is Corrections Officer Garcia at High Rock Penitentiary. We have survivors in need of evacuation. Please respond." The reply came through broken but clear enough. "High Rock is designated Ground Zero. No evacuation authorized. The facility will be sanitized at dawn. God help you all." The implication hit us like a physical blow. The military wasn't coming to rescue us. They were coming to erase all evidence of what had happened here, including any survivors who might tell the story. "They're going to bomb the prison," Vasquez said, voicing what we were all thinking. "With us inside it." Dr. Crawford's scientific detachment crumbled completely. "They can't do that. I'm a federal contractor. Colonel Hargrove had presidential authorization for this project." "Your project failed," Garcia said coldly. "Now they're cleaning up the mess, including witnesses." The warden laughed bitterly. "I should have known. When they selected High Rock for the experiment, they mentioned its remote location, easy to isolate in case of containment failure. This changed everything. We weren't just fighting to survive until rescue arrived. We were fighting to escape before the entire facility was destroyed." "We need a new plan," I said, my mind racing through possibilities. "The radio room in cell block A has an emergency channel direct to the governor's office. If we can reach it, maybe we can negotiate an extraction." "And if we can't?" Vasquez asked. "Then we find our own way out. There's an old drainage tunnel that runs from the prison lake to the river 2 miles east. It was sealed during renovations, but I can reopen it. It would get us far enough from the prison to survive whatever they're planning." Garcia checked his weapon. "First things first. We get to cell block A, link up with the others, then figure out our exit strategy." I nodded, turning back to the door. When I opened it carefully, the corridor beyond was dark and eerily silent. Cell block B had been evacuated earlier in the day when the power first failed. The cells stood empty, their doors hanging open. We moved in tight formation, our electrical deterrents creating a protective bubble around us. The warden needed support now, leaning heavily on Vasquez as we advanced. The main hall connecting the cell blocks loomed ahead, a large open space we would need to cross to reach cell block A. Through its windows, I could see the prison yard illuminated by the storm's unnatural lightning. Dozens of infected wandered aimlessly, occasionally twitching when electrical discharges lit the sky. "Ready?" I asked, gripping the pulse rifle. "Once we start across, don't stop for anything." Everyone nodded, faces grim but determined. We were about to move when Dr. Crawford suddenly grabbed my arm. "Wait," she whispered. "Look at the yard." I peered through the window and felt my blood run cold. The infected were no longer moving randomly. They were gathering in formation, arranging themselves in concentric circles around a central figure. Wilson stood in the middle, his arms raised as if conducting some twisted symphony. "What is he doing?" Garcia asked. "Organizing them," Dr. Crawford replied, her scientific curiosity momentarily overriding her fear. "The primary infected is establishing a hierarchical structure. This is unprecedented. The hive mind is evolving faster than our models predicted." As we watched, Wilson lowered his arms. The infected nearest to him immediately broke from the circle and began moving toward the buildings. Not randomly, but in coordinated groups covering all possible exits. "He's cutting off our escape routes," I realized, methodically isolating the buildings from each other. "How can he know where we are?" Vasquez asked. Dr. Crawford's expression was haunted. "The electrical fields. Our deterrents that repel the regular infected are like beacons to him. Wilson's altered neural pathways can sense electrical currents from greater distances. He's tracking us by our own protection." This was a devastating revelation. The very technology keeping the common infected at bay was leading their leaders straight to us. "We need to move now," I insisted, "before they completely surround cell block A." We burst through the doors into the main hall, running full tilt towards cell block A. The space was littered with debris from the initial chaos, abandoned equipment, scattered papers, dark stains I tried not to look at too closely. We were halfway across when movement caught my eye. From a side corridor, a group of infected emerged, cutting off our path. These weren't prison staff or inmates. They wore the distinctive uniforms of the Colonel's research team. "The extraction team," Dr. Crawford gasped. "They were supposed to evacuate us." Now they were hunting us, moving with the same broken coordination as the other infected, but showing concerning signs of tactical awareness. They spread out, attempting to flank our position. "Change of plan," I shouted. "Fall back to the security office. We can barricade ourselves there." We changed direction, the warden stumbling as we increased our pace. The infected researchers pursued, joined by more coming in from other corridors. Our electrical deterrent slowed them but didn't stop them completely. These infected seemed more resistant to the electrical field than others we'd encountered. "Through here," Garcia called, holding open a heavy security door. We piled into the small office, slamming the door shut behind us. Garcia and I immediately pushed a metal filing cabinet against it, reinforcing our barricade. The room was designed as a security checkpoint between cell blocks, with reinforced walls and a single window overlooking the yard. Monitors on the wall displayed security feeds from around the prison, many now dark from power failures. "We're trapped," Dr. Crawford said, stating the obvious. "They'll surround us within minutes." I moved to the security monitors, checking which systems were still operational. Most were offline, but one camera still showed cell block A, our original destination. I could see movement inside. Our people were still alive, but now cut off from us. "Jerry," I muttered, recognizing my assistant moving between barricaded positions. He'd organized the survivors to defend their safe zone, establishing electrical barriers at key entry points. "Can you contact them?" Garcia asked, noticing my focus on the monitor. I checked the communication panel. Internal phones are down, but there might be another way. The security office had an independent electrical system designed to remain operational even during facility-wide outages. If I could access it, I might be able to send a signal to cell block A. While I worked on the electrical panel, Garcia kept watch at the door. The infected had reached our position and were pounding on the reinforced door, their collective strength gradually overwhelming our barricade. "Whatever you're planning, do it fast," he urged. "That door won't hold forever." I pried open the electrical panel, revealing a complex array of wiring. By rerouting power from the office's emergency backup, I might be able to create a power surge in cell block A, a signal Jerry would recognize as deliberate rather than random. The warden had slumped to the floor, his transformation accelerating. Dr. Crawford maintained her distance but continued observing him with clinical interest. "Is he still with us?" I asked, not looking up from my work. "Barely," she replied. "His resistance is remarkable. Most subjects lose cognitive function much earlier in the process." The warden's voice, when it came, was barely recognizable. "Tell them," he rasped. "Tell them everything. The world needs to know what happened here." I paused my work, meeting his gaze. Even clouded by infection, his eyes held a desperate sincerity. "I will," I promised. "If I make it out, I'll make sure everyone knows the truth." He nodded once, then closed his eyes, concentrating on his internal battle. I returned to the wiring, working as quickly as precision would allow. The banging on the door grew louder, the cabinet beginning to slide across the floor despite Garcia and Vasquez's efforts to hold it in place. "Almost got it," I muttered, connecting the final wires. "Everyone brace yourselves." I completed the circuit, sending a massive power surge through the system. The lights in the security office flickered wildly, and on the monitor, I could see corresponding flashes in cell block A. 3 long surges, 3 short, 3 long, the universal SOS in electrical form. On the monitor, Jerry looked up at the lights, his expression changing from confusion to understanding. He knew someone was deliberately signaling him. He knew we were alive and in trouble. But would he be able to help us in time? The barricade was failing, the door beginning to splinter under the relentless assault. We were running out of options and time. The warden suddenly convulsed, his body arching in pain. Dr. Crawford backed away further as his movements became more violent. "It's happening," she announced clinically. "The final transformation stage." Garcia raised his pulse rifle, aiming it at the warden with grim resolve. "I'm sorry, sir." Before he could fire, I spotted something on one of the still-functioning security monitors. A group of figures moving with purpose through the maintenance tunnels. Not infected, but survivors from cell block A. Jerry had received our signal and was sending help. "Hold on," I said to Garcia. "We might have a chance after all." The warden's transformation was accelerating. His body convulsed violently, fingers curling into claws as his back arched in pain. The veins beneath his skin darkened, tracing ominous patterns across his face and neck. Garcia kept his weapon trained on him, finger hovering over the trigger. "Wait," I urged, pointing to the security monitor. "Jerry's sending a team through the maintenance tunnels. They'll reach us in minutes." "The warden doesn't have minutes," Dr. Crawford observed clinically. "Neural degradation is almost complete." I searched the security office desperately for anything that might help us. My eyes landed on a circuit breaker panel labeled Emergency Containment. It controlled the electrical locks on specialized isolation cells designed for violent inmates, cells with independent power systems. "We can contain him," I said, moving to the panel. "There's an isolation cell 2 doors down. If we can get him there before he turns completely, we can lock him in safely." Garcia looked skeptical but nodded. "Better than the alternative. Vasquez, help me with him." Together they lifted the warden, who was now barely conscious. His skin burned with fever, but his eyes still showed flickers of awareness, the man fighting against the monster he was becoming. The infected outside continued battering our door, the barricade sliding further with each impact. We had only moments before they broke through. "I'll clear the path," I said, gripping the pulse rifle. "When I give the signal, follow me to the isolation cell." I moved to the door, positioning myself to fire as soon as the barricade gave way. The cabinet slid another inch, creating a gap through which I could see infected faces pressed against the reinforced glass. Among them was one of the colonel's researchers, his milky eyes finding mine with unnerving focus. "Ready," I called, bracing the rifle against my shoulder. "On my mark." The barricade gave way suddenly, the cabinet toppling forward. I fired immediately, the pulse rifle discharging waves of electrical energy that sent the first wave of infected sprawling. Their bodies convulsed as the current overwhelmed their hypersensitive nervous systems. "Now!" I shouted, pushing through the temporary gap. We moved as a unit, Garcia and Vasquez half carrying the warden between them, Dr. Crawford close behind. I led the way, firing controlled bursts that cleared our path toward the isolation cells. The corridor seemed endless, each step taking us past more infected converging from adjoining hallways. The pulse rifle's charge was depleting rapidly, its blue indicator fading to a dull purple. "Almost there," I called out, spotting the reinforced door of the isolation wing. 50 feet. We reached it just as the rifle's charge hit critical levels. I keyed in the access code, the door sliding open to reveal a sterile corridor lined with specialized containment cells. These weren't standard prison cells, but medical isolation units designed for inmates with contagious diseases or extreme behavioral issues. "Cell 3, I directed, pointing to a unit with its own power supply indicator still glowing green. We were guiding the warden toward it when he suddenly went rigid. A terrible sound escaped his throat. Not quite human, not quite animal. His eyes flew open, now completely clouded over with that familiar milky white. "Drop him!" Garcia shouted, backing away. Vasquez reacted instantly, releasing his hold and scrambling backward. The warden crashed to the floor, his body twitching violently. Then, with unnatural speed, he flipped onto all fours and lunged at the nearest target, Dr. Crawford. I fired the pulse rifle's last charge directly at him. The warden's body seized mid-air, crashing to the floor just inches from Crawford's feet. The temporary paralysis wouldn't last long. "Get him in the cell," I ordered, grabbing the warden's shoulders while he was still immobilized. Together, we dragged his convulsing form into the isolation cell and slammed the door shut. I activated the electronic lock just as he began to recover, hurling himself against the reinforced glass with inhuman strength. "That was too close," Garcia muttered, his usual composure shaken. We had no time to recover. The sounds of pursuit echoed down the corridor we'd just traveled. The infected had followed us and were closing fast. "In here," I said, ushering everyone into an adjacent isolation cell. "We can hold them off until help arrives." Unlike the warden's cell, this one I left unlocked. We needed free movement, but its reinforced walls would provide temporary protection. We crowded inside, Garcia and I positioning ourselves at the entrance, weapons ready. The first infected rounded the corner seconds later, prison guards and inmates moving with that distinctive broken gait. Behind them came the more coordinated infected from the research team, and I caught a glimpse of Wilson directing them from further back. "He's controlling them," Dr. Crawford whispered, peering over my shoulder. "Organizing the attack." Garcia fired his pulse rifle, dropping the front line of infected. I added my electrical deterrent device, creating a barrier they couldn't cross without pain. It was working, temporarily holding them at bay, but Wilson stayed just out of range, studying our defenses with unnerving intelligence. "The rifle's almost drained," Garcia warned, checking the power indicator. 2, maybe 3 more shots. We were running out of options when a noise from behind made us turn. The ventilation grate in the cell's ceiling popped open and a familiar face appeared in the opening. "Jerry!" I called out, relief flooding through me. "Down here." My assistant dropped into the cell, followed by Rodriguez and 2 inmates from our original group. They carried improvised weapons, metal pipes wrapped with electrified wire, creating makeshift shock batons. "About time you showed up," I said, clapping Jerry on the shoulder. "Your signal was hard to miss," he replied with a grim smile. "Half the block's power surged at once. Figured it was either you or the world's biggest electrical malfunction." Rodriguez took in our situation with a practiced eye. "We've secured a path back to cell block A through the maintenance tunnels. But we need to move now. Wilson has most of the infected swarming the ground level." Jerry handed me a small device I recognized immediately, an electronic tablet containing the prison's electrical schematics. "You had these all along?" I asked, bewildered. Jerry nodded. "Found them in the warden's office the day before the outbreak. Someone had marked up the tunnels, creating new access points that weren't on the official plans. I thought it was suspicious, so I took them." This explained how Wilson seemed to know the prison's layout so intimately. The containment experiment had been planned well in advance, with escape routes and control points already mapped out. "We need to get back to cell block A," I said, studying the schematics. "From there, we might be able to contact the outside world before the military arrives at dawn." "About that," Rodriguez said grimly. "We intercepted more radio traffic. They're not just planning to bomb the prison. They're going to initiate something called Protocol 7, complete electrical overload of the facility's power grid, followed by targeted missile strikes. Nothing will survive, not even evidence of what happened here." Dr. Crawford paled visibly. "That's insane. The research data could be invaluable for developing countermeasures." "You still don't get it, do you?" Garcia snapped. "This isn't about science anymore. It's about covering up a catastrophic failure before the world finds out the government created zombies in a Montana prison." I studied the schematics, focusing on our immediate challenge, reaching cell block A safely. The maintenance tunnel Jerry's team had used was our best option, but its entrance was now blocked by infected. We needed a diversion. "The isolation wing has its own power grid," I noted, pointing to the schematics. "If we overload it, we could create a surge that would temporarily disable the infected close enough to feel it. That would give us an opening to reach the tunnel access." Jerry nodded in understanding. "The primary junction box is in the control room at the end of this corridor. I can rig it to overload on a timer, giving us a head start." "Do it," I agreed. "Everyone else prepare to move fast when the surge hits. The effect won't last long." While Jerry worked on the junction box, I briefed the others on what we'd learned: the government experiment, Wilson's unusual abilities, and the planned destruction of High Rock at dawn. Rodriguez and his team were shocked, but not entirely surprised. "We figured it was something like that," Rodriguez said. "Too many strange things happening at once. The missing inmates who supposedly got transferred last month, the unmarked trucks arriving at night, the warden's closed-door meetings." "How many survivors in cell block A?" I asked. 17 total. Mixed group, guards, inmates, maintenance staff. We've established a secure perimeter using the electrical barriers you designed. So far, it's holding." It was more than I'd dared hope for. 17 people who might still escape this nightmare if we could find a way out before dawn. Jerry returned from the control room, his task completed. "Junction box is set to overload in 30 seconds. The surge will affect everything in a 50-foot radius." "Everyone ready?" I asked, checking that our electrical deterrents were deactivated to protect them from the coming surge. The group nodded, faces grim but determined. Garcia positioned himself at the door, ready to lead our charge through the infected once the surge hit. 3, 2, 1. Jerry counted down. The lights flared blindingly bright, then exploded in showers of sparks. Through the doorway, I could see the infected in the corridor dropping to their knees, their hypersensitive nervous systems overwhelmed by the electrical surge. "Now!" Garcia shouted, bursting through the door. We followed in tight formation, sprinting past the temporarily incapacitated infected. Wilson was nowhere to be seen, either smart enough to stay beyond the surge's radius or temporarily disabled himself. Jerry led us to a maintenance access panel hidden behind a storage locker. We pried it open and crawled inside one by one, pulling the panel closed behind us just as the infected began to recover. The tunnel was cramped but navigable, leading directly towards cell block A. We moved as quickly as possible, aware that Wilson might already be redirecting his forces to intercept us. "What's the plan once we reach cell block A?" Dr. Crawford asked as we crawled. "We're still trapped inside a prison scheduled for destruction in less than 4 hours. It was the question I'd been turning over in my mind since hearing about Protocol 7. The prison was designed to be inescapable, its perimeter secured by multiple fences, guard towers, and now swarms of infected. But I'd spent 10 years learning every inch of its systems, including weaknesses never meant to be exploited. "The drainage tunnel," I replied. "The old outflow pipe that runs from the prison's water treatment plant to the river. It was sealed during renovations 3 years ago, but I can reopen it. It would get us far enough from the facility to survive the bombing." "And then what?" Vasquez asked. "Even if we escape, the infection has already spread beyond the prison. The whole county could be compromised." It was a sobering thought. Our immediate focus had been survival, but the larger implications were horrifying. If the infection continued to spread, with intelligent infected like Wilson coordinating the others, how far would it reach? How much of the world would fall? "One problem at a time," I said firmly. "First, we survive the night. Then, we warn whoever will listen about what really happened here. The truth has to get out if there's any hope of containing this." We reached the end of the tunnel, emerging into the lower level of cell block A. The difference from the rest of the prison was immediately apparent. Here, order had been maintained. Electrical barriers hummed at key entry points, keeping the infected at bay. Survivors moved with purpose, maintaining defenses and monitoring security feeds. Our arrival caused an immediate stir. People gathered around, peppering us with questions about the outside world and whether help was coming. Their hope was palpable and heartbreaking, given what we knew about the military's plans. I called everyone together in the central area. It was time to share what we'd learned and prepare for what might be our last stand against both the infected and our own government's attempt to bury their mistakes. "Listen up," I began. "I know you've all been hoping for rescue, but I need to tell you the truth about what's really happening at High Rock and what's coming for us at dawn." The faces staring back at me reflected a mix of emotions: hope, fear, exhaustion, and the desperate need to believe survival was possible. I hated to crush that hope, but they deserved the truth. I explained everything: the government experiment gone wrong, Wilson's unusual abilities, and the military's plan to erase High Rock at dawn. "They're going to activate Protocol 7, I concluded. "Complete electrical overload followed by airstrikes, nothing will be left." A heavy silence fell over the group. Some looked stunned, others angry. A few nodded grimly, as if they'd suspected something like this all along. "So what do we do?" asked Mills, one of the inmates we'd rescued earlier. "Just sit here and wait to die?" "No," I replied firmly. "We're getting out. All of us. There's an old drainage tunnel that runs from the water treatment plant to the river about 2 miles east. It was sealed during renovations, but I can reopen it. If we can reach it, we can escape before the strike happens." "What about the infected?" Rodriguez asked. The yard is swarming with them, and Wilson seems to know our every move. This was the most difficult part of the plan. The water treatment plant was on the far side of the prison complex, separated from cell block A by the main yard, currently filled with infected under Wilson's control. Our electrical barriers work, I said, but not for long distances. We'd need to create a corridor of protection all the way across the yard. With what power source? Jerry asked. The emergency batteries are nearly depleted. I turned to the electrical schematics Jerry had saved. There's another option. The prison was built on top of an experimental power grid, a prototype developed by the military for remote installations. It includes induction coils beneath the main yard that were never fully activated. Dr. Crawford stepped forward, examining the schematics with new interest. You're talking about the Faraday project. It was designed to create an electromagnetic barrier that could disable electronic devices, or, in this case, disrupt the infected's hypersensitive neural pathways. Exactly, I confirmed. If we can access the main control systems and override the safety protocols, we could activate the entire grid at once. It would create a massive electrical field across the whole prison. And what would that do to the infected? Garcia asked. Based on what we've seen, it should temporarily disable them. Maybe even reset their neural pathways briefly. It would give us a window to cross the yard and reach the water treatment plant. What about us? Vasquez asked. Wouldn't this electromagnetic field affect humans too? It was a valid concern. To some degree, yes. We'd experience disorientation, maybe nausea, but our nervous systems aren't rewired like theirs. We'd recover faster. I could see the survivors weighing this information, calculating the desperate mathematics of survival. The plan had enormous risks, but with dawn approaching, our options were dwindling by the minute. Where's the control system for this power grid? Rodriguez asked. The central tower, I replied, pointing to the center of the prison complex on the schematics. It houses the main control room for all prison systems, including the experimental grid. That's Wilson's territory now, Garcia said grimly. He's established the central tower as his base. We've been monitoring their movements from the security cameras. This complicated things significantly. The central tower was the most defensible position in the prison, with limited access points and clear sight lines in all directions. If Wilson was using it as his command center, reaching the control room would be nearly impossible. We need a diversion, I decided. Something big enough to draw Wilson and his main force away from the tower. Jerry's eyes lit up with sudden inspiration. The armory. We've been avoiding it because of the infected concentration there, but it contains what we need. The riot control equipment includes sound cannons designed to disorient violent inmates. If we could activate them remotely, it might draw the infected away from the tower. How do we activate them remotely? I asked. The emergency broadcast system, Jerry explained. It's connected to all prison systems, including the riot control equipment. From the communications room here in cell block A, we could trigger the cannons. It was a solid plan, but still left us with the challenge of reaching the central tower during the diversion. We'd need a small, fast team that could move through the prison undetected. I'll lead the team to the central tower, I said. Jerry knows the systems as well as I do, so he should come. We'll need one more person for security. I'll go, Garcia volunteered immediately. I nodded, grateful for his steady presence. The rest of you will prepare for evacuation. Once we activate the power grid, you'll have maybe 10 minutes to cross the yard and reach the water treatment plant. Rodriguez, you'll lead that group. And Dr. Crawford? Rodriguez asked, glancing at the scientist. All eyes turned to her. The survivors had mixed reactions to learning she was part of the team responsible for the outbreak. Some viewed her with outright hostility, others with wary curiosity. Dr. Crawford comes with my team, I decided. Her knowledge of the infected might prove useful, and she understands the electromagnetic technology better than any of us. With the plan established, we began preparations immediately. Time was our enemy now, with less than 3 hours until dawn. Jerry and I gathered the equipment we'd need to override the control room systems: portable power packs, specialized tools, electrical bypasses. Dr. Crawford approached me as I worked, her scientific detachment finally cracking under the pressure. "Why include me?" she asked quietly. "After what my team did, I'd understand if you left me behind." "I'm not in the business of abandoning people," I replied without looking up from my work, "even those who might deserve it." "I didn't know," she insisted. "The project was presented as non-lethal crowd control technology. I never imagined it could cause this kind of mutation." I paused, meeting her eyes. "Maybe not. But you were experimenting on prisoners without their consent. People deemed expendable. That should have told you something about the project's ethics." She had no response to that. After a moment, she simply nodded and moved away to prepare for our mission. Garcia joined me, checking his pulse rifle. "You sure about taking her? She could compromise the mission if her loyalties are divided." "Her loyalty is to her own survival now," I replied. "Besides, we need her expertise. The control systems for that power grid will be complicated. Jerry's sending a team through the maintenance tunnels. They'll reach us in minutes." "The warden doesn't have minutes," Dr. Crawford observed clinically. "Neural degradation is almost complete." I searched the security office desperately for anything that might help us. My eyes landed on a circuit breaker panel labeled Emergency Containment. It controlled the electrical locks on specialized isolation cells designed for violent inmates, cells with independent power systems. "We can contain him," I said, moving to the panel. "There's an isolation cell 2 doors down. If we can get him there before he turns completely, we can lock him in safely." Garcia looked skeptical but nodded. "Better than the alternative. Vasquez, help me with him." Together they lifted the warden, who was now barely conscious. His skin burned with fever, but his eyes still showed flickers of awareness, the man fighting against the monster he was becoming. The infected outside continued battering our door, the barricade sliding further with each impact. We had only moments before they broke through. "I'll clear the path," I said, gripping the pulse rifle. "When I give the signal, follow me to the isolation cell." I moved to the door, positioning myself to fire as soon as the barricade gave way. The cabinet slid another inch, creating a gap through which I could see infected faces pressed against the reinforced glass. Among them was one of the colonel's researchers, his milky eyes finding mine with unnerving focus. "Ready," I called, bracing the rifle against my shoulder. "On my mark." The barricade gave way suddenly, the cabinet toppling forward. I fired immediately, the pulse rifle discharging waves of electrical energy that sent the first wave of infected sprawling. Their bodies convulsed as the current overwhelmed their hypersensitive nervous systems. "Now!" I shouted, pushing through the temporary gap. We moved as a unit, Garcia and Vasquez half carrying the warden between them, Dr. Crawford close behind. I led the way, firing controlled bursts that cleared our path toward the isolation cells. The corridor seemed endless, each step taking us past more infected converging from adjoining hallways. The pulse rifle's charge was depleting rapidly, its blue indicator fading to a dull purple. "Almost there," I called out, spotting the reinforced door of the isolation wing. 50 feet. We reached it just as the rifle's charge hit critical levels. I keyed in the access code, the door sliding open to reveal a sterile corridor lined with specialized containment cells. These weren't standard prison cells, but medical isolation units designed for inmates with contagious diseases or extreme behavioral issues. "Cell 3, I directed, pointing to a unit with its own power supply indicator still glowing green. We were guiding the warden toward it when he suddenly went rigid. A terrible sound escaped his throat. Not quite human, not quite animal. His eyes flew open, now completely clouded over with that familiar milky white. "Drop him!" Garcia shouted, backing away. Vasquez reacted instantly, releasing his hold and scrambling backward. The warden crashed to the floor, his body twitching violently. Then, with unnatural speed, he flipped onto all fours and lunged at the nearest target, Dr. Crawford. I fired the pulse rifle's last charge directly at him. The warden's body seized mid-air, crashing to the floor just inches from Crawford's feet. The temporary paralysis wouldn't last long. "Get him in the cell," I ordered, grabbing the warden's shoulders while he was still immobilized. Together, we dragged his convulsing form into the isolation cell and slammed the door shut. I activated the electronic lock just as he began to recover, hurling himself against the reinforced glass with inhuman strength. "That was too close," Garcia muttered, his usual composure shaken. We had no time to recover. The sounds of pursuit echoed down the corridor we'd just traveled. The infected had followed us and were closing fast. "In here," I said, ushering everyone into an adjacent isolation cell. "We can hold them off until help arrives." Unlike the warden's cell, this one I left unlocked. We needed free movement, but its reinforced walls would provide temporary protection. We crowded inside, Garcia and I positioning ourselves at the entrance, weapons ready. The first infected rounded the corner seconds later, prison guards and inmates moving with that distinctive broken gait. Behind them came the more coordinated infected from the research team, and I caught a glimpse of Wilson directing them from further back. "He's controlling them," Dr. Crawford whispered, peering over my shoulder. "Organizing the attack." Garcia fired his pulse rifle, dropping the front line of infected. I added my electrical deterrent device, creating a barrier they couldn't cross without pain. I led our small team, using my knowledge of the prison's infrastructure to navigate the labyrinthine passages. Jerry followed close behind. Then Dr. Crawford, with Garcia covering our rear. Our electrical deterrents provided minimal illumination, casting eerie blue shadows on the concrete walls. We moved as silently as possible, aware that even in these tunnels, we weren't safe from detection. Wilson's heightened sensitivity to electrical currents meant our devices could betray our position if he was nearby. Approaching junction point, I whispered over my shoulder. Central tower access is 50 yards ahead. The junction point was a small chamber where several maintenance tunnels converged. Under normal circumstances, it would be staffed by maintenance personnel during shift changes. Now, it stood empty, dust particles floating in the beam of our lights. We paused, listening for any signs of movement. The prison had developed its own soundtrack of horror, distant moans echoing through ventilation shafts. The occasional metallic bang as infected threw themselves against barriers, and beneath it all, an unnatural stillness that felt more threatening than noise. "Clear," Garcia confirmed after a tense moment. I consulted the electrical schematics, tracing our path to the central tower's lower level. We need to take the northeast tunnel. It emerges in the tower's mechanical room. As we prepared to continue, Jerry suddenly grabbed my arm. "Wait," he whispered, pointing to a junction box on the wall. "That shouldn't be active." He was right. A small indicator light on the box was glowing green, despite the power failures throughout the facility. I moved closer, examining it cautiously. It's connected to an independent circuit, I realized. Someone's restored power to specific systems. "Wilson?" Garcia suggested. "Possibly," I agreed. "But why this junction? It controls the tower's internal communications and security doors." Dr. Crawford pushed forward, studying the box with scientific interest. He's adapting the infrastructure to serve his needs, using what he remembers from his human life to create a controlled environment. It was an unsettling thought. The infected weren't just mindless monsters, but were evolving, using the prison systems against us. I made a mental note to check all independent circuits when we reached the control room. If Wilson had restored power to certain systems, we needed to know which ones. We continued through the northeast tunnel, emerging eventually into the central tower's mechanical room. The space was filled with HVAC equipment, water pumps, and electrical transformers, the beating heart of the prison's infrastructure. Unlike the rest of the facility, this room showed signs of recent activity. Tools lay scattered across workbenches, panels had been removed from equipment, and wiring hung exposed from ceiling conduits. "Someone's been making modifications," Jerry observed, examining the altered systems, "rerouting power to specific areas." "Can you tell where?" I asked. Jerry traced the modified circuits. "Upper levels of the tower primarily. Security systems, communications equipment, and the elevator." This confirmed our suspicion that Wilson had established the central tower as his command center. It also suggested a disturbing level of cognitive function well beyond what Dr. Crawford had initially described. "We need to move up to the control room," I said. "It's on level 5. "Stairs or elevator?" Garcia asked. "Stairs," I decided. Too risky to use the elevator if Wilson has restored power to it. He might be monitoring it. We located the emergency stairwell and began our ascent. Each landing had a security door with a small window, allowing us glimpses of the tower's different levels as we passed. The first 2 floors appeared abandoned, showing signs of the initial chaos but no current activity. At the 3rd floor landing, Garcia motioned for us to stop. Through the door window, we could see movement. Infected prison staff wandering aimlessly through what had once been the administrative offices. They showed no signs of Wilson's coordinated intelligence, simply shuffling between desks and cubicles like grotesque parodies of their former working routines. "Standard infected," Dr. Crawford whispered, "not under direct control." We waited until they moved away from the stairwell door before continuing our ascent. The 4th floor was similarly occupied, but as we approached the 5th floor landing, the atmosphere changed. The stairwell felt colder, with a strange electrical charge permeating the air. My skin prickled with static electricity, and the lights on our deterrent devices flickered erratically. "Something's generating a strong electromagnetic field up ahead," I warned. "Everyone be ready." Garcia readied his pulse rifle as I approached the 5th floor security door. Through its window, I could see the control room, a large circular space filled with monitoring stations, communications equipment, and the main control console for the prison systems. Unlike the chaotic lower floors, this level showed signs of deliberate organization. Equipment had been arranged in concentric circles around a central platform, where a figure stood with his back to us. Wilson. Even from a distance, his transformation was evident. His body had changed since our last encounter, becoming gaunt yet somehow more powerful. The veins beneath his skin glowed with a faint bluish light, pulsing in rhythm with the electrical equipment surrounding him. He wasn't alone. 6 other infected stood at various stations around the room, their movements more coordinated than the mindless shambling we'd witnessed elsewhere. "He's created lieutenants," Dr. Crawford whispered, scientific curiosity temporarily overriding her fear. "Secondary infected with higher functions. Fascinating." "Fascinating isn't the word I'd use," Garcia muttered. I studied the layout, looking for a path to the main control console. It stood on the opposite side of the room from our position, its screens still active with scrolling data. If we could reach it, we could override the safety protocols and activate the power grid. But with Wilson and his lieutenants occupying the space between us and our target, A direct approach seemed impossible. "We need another way in," I said, withdrawing from the window before Wilson could sense our presence. Jerry pointed to an access panel in the stairwell ceiling. "Maintenance crawl space. It runs above the entire floor, including the control room. We could enter from there." It was our best option. Using Garcia's boost, I removed the access panel and pulled myself up into the cramped crawl space. The others followed, Garcia coming last after ensuring the panel was replaced. The space was incredibly tight, with barely enough room to crawl between the ceiling panels and the structural supports. Dust and cobwebs suggested this area hadn't been accessed in years, which worked in our favor. Below us, through thin ceiling tiles, we could hear movement and strange, guttural sounds that might have been attempts at communication between Wilson and his lieutenants. We moved slowly, careful not to make any noise that might betray our presence. I led the way, using the schematics to navigate toward the control console's position. When we reached it, I carefully removed a ceiling tile to assess the situation below. The main console stood directly beneath us, currently unoccupied. Wilson remained at the central platform about 20 feet away, his attention focused on what appeared to be a makeshift map of the prison constructed from various materials. He was pointing to specific locations, his lieutenants watching with unnerving attentiveness. "He's planning something," Garcia whispered, "coordinating his forces. We need to move now, while they're distracted," I decided. "I'll go down first and access the console. Jerry, you follow and help with the override. Garcia, cover us from up here with the pulse rifle. Dr. Crawford, stay hidden until we need you for the authorization codes." Everyone nodded in agreement. I removed the ceiling tile completely, revealing a drop of about 8 feet to the console below. Taking a deep breath, I lowered myself through the opening as silently as possible, hanging from the edge momentarily before dropping to the floor. I landed in a crouch behind the console, immediately checking to see if my movement had been detected. Wilson and his lieutenants continued their strange gathering, unaware of my presence. Jerry followed a moment later, landing beside me with impressive agility for a maintenance technician. We turned to the console, its screens displaying a complex array of system diagnostics and security protocols. The prison's power grid was represented as a three-dimensional model, with most sections highlighted in red to indicate an active status. Only the central tower and small portions of the outer buildings showed green. "We need to reactivate the whole grid," I whispered to Jerry. "Everything at once." Jerry nodded, his fingers moving expertly across the keyboard. "Security protocols are active. We need Dr. Crawford's override codes." I signaled up to the ceiling, and Dr. Crawford's face appeared in the opening. She whispered down a series of alphanumeric codes, which Jerry input rapidly. The system accepted them, unlocking deeper access to the power grid controls. "We're in," Jerry confirmed, accessing the electromagnetic grid now. While he worked, I kept watch on Wilson and his group. They remained focused on their planning, but one of the lieutenants seemed restless, occasionally turning as if sensing something amiss. We needed to work faster. "How much longer?" I asked Jerry. "Almost there. The system is fighting me."